Okay.
So we are starting off on part one of hopefully a four-part series on making the case for Trump. Now, this series was really the idea of Robert here. Robert
Hello.
is Robert. I am very thrilled that you wanted to do this podcast. My name is Michael. I am in Florida. I am a Republican now, but I haven't always been a Republican. I started out as a Republican, then I saw Mexico and what deregulation did, so I became a Democrat, and then I felt kind of betrayed, and so I'm a Republican again for now. Not that I like, being part of either party, but either way, that's where I come. That's my background. That's where I come from. So, Robert, a little bit about you.
So I'm a retiree, and I live in New York, upstate, not New York City. I'm a Democrat. I've been a lifelong Democrat. I fully expect to remain a Democrat. But I'm very concerned with the big government lurch of our party, the apparent unwillingness of the Democratic leadership to exercise any sort of fiscal restraint. And I'm alarmed over the defundabilist movement, which moved me from riding with Biden to being willing to publicly support Donald Trump's reelection.
Yeah, that's not an easy move to make either. So, what was the final experience that you had that made you switch to Trump?
When Bernie Sanders took on Hillary, I became very disillusioned with a large segment of the Democratic Party, and I felt that Hillary was running a recognizably feminist candidacy, first one in American history, and Bernie blew it up for no particular reason. I feel that it takes a lot of preparatory work and a lot of education to set up a goal for a feminist approach to American politics. And again, Bernie blew it up. I was very hopeful that it would come back in the 2020 campaign, and my original candidate was Kamala Harris. And again, a recognizable feminist, although not an advanced or extreme feminist. And what drew me to her was her proposal to provide tax deductions for renters. And there's a lot of people who rent their living accommodations. It's an important segment of the real estate market, and I thought it was just amazing that a presidential candidate was willing to make a proposal to help renters. She lost me when she attacked Biden in the first Democratic debate, and particularly when she reopened what I thought was a closed debate on forced school busing. I find it detestable to think that we would use school children as pawns in our racial policy wars. And I just thought that Kamala Harris bringing that up in a debate at that juncture, in that context, showed a distinct lack of judgment and character. And I haven't been able to support her since. And I don't like that she will be one 78-year-old heart beating away from the presidency. But Biden concerns me more than Kamala because he seems very weak. Bernie Sanders was able to walk away from this and say, we might have lost the nomination, but we won the campaign. So in a lot of ways, Biden is Bernie-like. You figure you know, you have to unify the party. But what really brought me away from the Democrats was the defund the police movement. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
that really is defund the police. And many of the people advocating it, it even means disbanding the police. And Biden's original response in early June was, we'll just keep doing the same thing, more training, and the defund the police activists were very adamantly opposed, and Biden didn't seem to be very strong about it. So despite Biden's formal declarations of resistance to defund the police, he has not come out in favor of the police,
Mm-hmm.
in the way that Trump and Pence have. So Trump and Pence are affirmatively and deliberately and explicitly defending the police. Biden is trying to finesse the issue, and I just think that given the current makeup of the Democratic Party, Biden's going to get swept away. Plus, he's 78. Who knows if
Yeah.
he's going to be in office until 2024.
Well,
So,
you heard
with
what
those
happened
happy
in
thoughts,
Minneapolis, right?
no, not
Minneapolis, they've
yet. With
walked
those
back the whole
happy thoughts, I'm
defund the
going to switch
police
it over
thing
to you.
already. They've started
He
walking
what?
back the whole defund the police thing in Minneapolis already. They had to
He-
reconvene. They're like, then they use the excuse that it's not in our city's charter. It's not in our city constitution. We can't actually do that or dissolve them.
So
So they're
are
starting
you
to walk it
arguing in
back
Biden's
already.
favor here, or are you arguing against me and
No, I'm
that
saying that
defund the
the
police is
defund
really
the police
impossible?
thing is absolutely ridiculous. It's ridiculous, and the
Well, it is.
Minneapolis City Council's already started walking it back, right? And the thing is, it's interesting that Biden really didn't condemn any of the rioting and looting until it started to affect his poll numbers, and then he started coming out strongly against it, right? And my problem with Biden is that he doesn't really stand for anything. Like, he flip flops his position in which whatever is popular. That's what I've noticed about him for a while now. Like, he even flip flopped at the debate when it came to the Green New Deal. He said, I'm against the Green New Deal. And then he said he was for a Green New Deal, his Green New Deal, to get rid of fossil fuels. So, and then there was another clip where he was being heckled by somebody in Pennsylvania, a Trump supporter. And the Trump supporter said, you want to ban fossil fuels? And he's like, no, I don't. And then at the debate, he said he wanted to end fossil fuels. So, yeah,
Well,
that's a big problem
he
for
might
me.
not understand the difference between ending fossil fuels and uh, getting rid of them.
Yeah, it's a different debate, but we'll discuss economic policy in the next episode. Right now, we're really trying to focus on a little more of the whole racial thing, right? Of race inequality and income inequality within Black America versus White America, and you know, how do we fix that? And is Biden the answer to that? Right? And I
So
just don't see it.
we're at a disadvantage here a little bit, Michael. Two white
Mm-hmm.
guys
That's
with
true.
business affiliations talking about race issues, and a lot of people are going to turn us right off. Constantly encounter
That's
people
true.
saying, yes, for an older what is it, cisgendered,
Cisgendered, whatever.
cisgendered, uh, heterosexual male, of course you think this way. But I want to discuss the issues and try and find some substantive common ground with men and women of other
Yeah,
races.
yeah,
America is not a white only country. We
that's
are
true.
not arguing in favor of white supremacy or white privilege or anything like that. We're looking for racial justice and racial equity, and
Hmm.
for black people, brown people, yellow people to have the same shot at American success that we did.
Agreed. Definitely agreed. And one of the big things that I have found, right? Do you know who Master P is?
No.
So Master P is very famous in hip hop. And Master P, back I think it was in either June or July, he came out and said that what black people need to do is start buying up whole blocks of city property and converting them for their own use. And I'm like, Yes, yes. Okay, somebody's finally getting this. We need more black home ownership. We need more black business people. And that's what I really want to see. Like, that's one of my desires to see that.
Well,
And honestly,
even food production. I mean, you
mm-hmm,
think if you buy a few blocks of blighted city property with nobody living on it, demolish the buildings, and use the land to grow food, you could supply people's meats and vegetables, quite nicely,
mm-hmm.
and help them survive. Help them through hard times, make life better with homegrown foods.
Yeah, that's definitely one option. And one of the big things I'd like to see is, I think that I'm going to say this. I think that Trump's opportunity zones starts off in the right spot. Will it work? I guess time will tell. But one of the things that has been a big problem to black communities has been gentrification, where they tear down all of the old black properties and black businesses or low income businesses, which usually happen to be either black or Hispanic, and they tear down these whole districts and rebuild them, and then they end up pushing the people that were there for a long time out. And do you remember the riots in was it Detroit in the late 1960s?
I actually remember them, yeah.
Yeah, and so and now I'm only 32, so I've only read about it. But one of the things that happened there was they started considering this black neighborhood slums, right? They started calling them slums, and there was one business owner in particular. I forgot what the guy's name was, but his parents or his grandparents had come up from the south, from the deep south, either like Alabama or Mississippi or something, because they were the Jim Crow laws and everything. So they moved to Detroit and started a business. So they get to Detroit, and then a generation or two later, now they want to tear down this business and rebuild it, and rebuild the whole block. And he's like, well, who are you to tell me that my business is a slum? And a lot of the rioting had to do with that kind of a mentality. Was the government's coming in here and telling me that my business is in a crappy neighborhood. You're calling my neighborhood crappy. So rather than investing in the neighborhood, they started tearing these neighborhoods down and replacing them. And that's still going on today. And it's not just like a one party issue.
Well, I think gentrification refers more to private owners uh, buying properties, forcing out one-time residents, and
Yeah.
it's a it's a vexing problem. I mean, a big part of the reason that buildings become blighted, that neighborhoods become blighted, is because they become run down, and landlords become desperate to rent, and they drop the rents, and poor people, and in a lot of cases, poor people of color move into them, and you suddenly find that you have a lot of poor people living in an area which probably was never particularly desirable, but which housed working people with better means than the people of color. I mean, gentrification should include a component of neighborhood preservation and neighborhood renewal. A city known in Ithaca, New York, the home of Cornell University, is becoming very run down. You ever live in student housing?
Yes, but I mean, the student housing I lived in was actually pretty decent.
Okay, off-campus student housing.
Yes.
What? How is that?
It was fine. I currently live in student housing, but the student housing down here is a lot nicer than the student housing up there and it's also a law school. So I live in a villa, 2 bedrooms. I have a lanai and a kitchen and a giant bedroom and a
Nice,
study, two
nice.
bathrooms. I mean, yeah,
So
but
in any
I have a
case,
nice student housing.
in
But I
Northern
went to
City,
school in Binghamton, New York,
okay,
right?
Binghamton,
And yes, so we
Binghamton, Ithaca, both homes of great universities.
yes,
You have already
unfortunately I didn't go to the great university that was there. I went to a really
you have
crappy one,
you have
and it wasn't a
already run,
university.
you have already run down housing stock,
Mm-hmm.
which students further degrade. I mean, student housing tends to be
Mm-hmm.
overcrowded. Students tend not to be the best at maintaining any
And
semblance
the
of
student housing drives up the cost of rent too, as we see in Binghamton. The
right.
rent is starting to get almost to Ithaca levels. It's
Wow.
going to be there in a few years, and
Wow,
it's because
that's
of
not
student
good.
housing, right? Because these landlords come in and then they charge like $300 or $400 a person, right?
Right.
Instead of charging for the apartment, they're charging per person. And everybody's now just trying to build student housing, student housing, student housing, student housing, and it drives up the cost of rent. And actually, before I left Binghamton and moved down here, I moved down recently. So my wife just started this semester, and so before we moved, there are two things. So one of the things was something got defeated in city council. On the west side of Binghamton, New York, there was a bill where somebody was petitioning to turn this part of the west side into a commercial zone instead of into a private housing zone. Right? They were trying to turn it into a commercial zone so they could build more student housing, and not a single person on the city council voted in favor of it.
Hmm.
Not a single person, because they knew what the implications were. It would mean more student housing, and it would mean rent would increase. And so they said no. And then there's another project going on in Binghamton, New York called NOMA, north of Main Street, right? And at first I was like, is this a gentrification project? Are they like trying to rename everything? And then it turns out it's actually an anti-gentrification project where they're getting tired of the city calling every single place a slum, right? Because there are people that live there and they're tired. And then people are tired of being kicked out of their homes.
Well, north of Maine in Binghamton, I think, is a good example. Um, it's mostly either owner-occupied housing or one, two, possibly three units where
Mm-hmm.
you have a building with a downstairs apartment, an upstairs apartment, or a building with a downstairs apartment, an upstairs apartment, and then maybe a little apartment for an in-law or a single person somewhere on the premises or somewhere on the
Yeah, that's how
property.
my apartment was that my wife and I lived in on Clinton Street in Binghamton. We had an insurance agency downstairs, and then in the back downstairs we had an apartment for one person, and then upstairs we had our two-bedroom apartment with an attic and a bathroom and a washer-dryer hookup, and then there was another apartment upstairs for a single person.
And those sort of neighborhoods are very amenable to urban policy that favors small landlords and homeowners. If the building is occupied by the owner, he's in the downstairs apartment, he rents the upstairs apartment. It's owner occupied, but it's also a small rental building. Uh, Urban policy that helped him maintain the house, keep it painted, fix up the porch, make sure the windows are well maintained, uh, keep the grounds in order, would not cost a lot of money and would do a lot towards making neighborhoods more presentable. Now, unfortunately, neither party views urban policy as a small owner, small house, small unit kind of thing. Neither Trump nor Biden. view it in this way. The single advantage that Trump has over Biden in this is that Trump does understand real estate values. He does understand to some degree how to create amenable, nice, good neighborhoods that people can live in. And his father did that kind of work. Trump doesn't have a lot of residential development other than in big buildings like him and Kushner build, multi-story high rises with a lot of units. But he at least is open to people who want to fix places up and make a little money in the real estate market. I don't see the same sort of mentality either in the New York state government, which is dominated by liberals, in the New York City government, which is dominated by liberals, nor in anything in Biden's past. Harris, like I said, started off with what I consider a great proposal of rent deductions, income tax deductions for renters. That's pretty much done, and she doesn't seem to be pushing any sort of urban policy that favors the poor.
I mean, she's not even out of the. You want to talk? People talked about Joe Biden being in the basement. I haven't heard from Kamala Harris at all. I've heard from Biden way more than I've heard from Kamala. So if you were going to accuse anybody of hiding in the basement, it's got to be her. Why is she hiding in the basement? She's a pit bull. You don't just hide the pit bull inside.
They should be, in my opinion, because of the pandemic, they should be highly limited in their public appearances. I mean, Trump got COVID from going to public appearances in North Carolina.
Well, nobody really knows exactly where it came from, but everybody that was at Amy Coney Barrett's revealing or unveiling pretty much got it there.
Well,
I mean, we've got a few senators, we've got a lot of people.
We don't. A number of them who were there have it.
Mm-hmm.
But all of them had very extensive travel schedules. We don't know who the index patients are. There's no index patient who's been identified for the Rose Garden ceremony. Here's a Rose Garden ceremony. People are screened up to the wazoo. They can't figure out who the index patient is. I mean, to me, that indicates that they all contracted it at separate places and happened to be in one place together at one time.
Yeah,
not that they
possible.
caught it there.
Yeah, but still, I mean, Harris could at the very least do a live chat or a live stream.
Well,
she can just
she might
sit
well
by
be
herself.
doing it. That we don't see it doesn't mean that she's not doing it. I also get a lot of criticism because I criticize her to a fair degree. And I get criticism from other people that I'm scared of her because she's a woman of color, that she's a Afro-Caribbean. Is her mother Indian or was her mother Surinese?
Yeah, something like that. I don't remember. All I know is she's part what is it? That Indian and part Caribbean, Afro-Caribbean or whatever.
But I find those sorts of criticisms to be rather condescending and off point. I mean, Harris is a law school graduate.
Mm-hmm.
She was the DA of one of the largest urban counties in the United States. She was the Attorney General of California. Now she's a United States Senator. I mean, we have to be able to talk about her and criticize her in the same manner we would criticize the late John McCain, Senator Kerry, Vice President Mike Pence, Senator McConnell,
My
Governor
problem
Cuomo,
with Kamala
and
Harris is
anybody
she's
else.
got like one career achievement, and that's yelling at Brett Kavanaugh. Like, what career achievements does she actually have? Obama had a whole bunch of achievements by the time he was president. You know, he at least had some civil rights things that
That's
he
an
was in
unfair
charge of.
characterization, Mike, of Kamala Harris. I mean, I criticize her for that because, to me, it indicates an abrasiveness that is unbecoming in a U.S. senator and is, Trump-level abrasiveness. Just we're going to shut people down. But she brought up the efficiency of the San Francisco district attorney. I mean, she ran back when she was still smart on crime, before she started flip-flopping on that. She ran against her boss, the then current district attorney, and she brought the conviction rate up, I believe, 20 points, from a 62% conviction rate to an 82% conviction rate. So she did not exceed the California state district attorney's median rate, and she wasn't anywhere near the New York rate, which is around 97, between 94 and 97% successful conviction rate. But she did improve that office, and she was very active as Attorney General. I mean, she says, she runs through this litany of big companies which she sued, which I tend to hold against her, because I don't like putting cases together and making law one suit at a time. I mean, I think that's a legislative job. But I think Kamala Harris has reasonably good credentials, as any other senator to be vice president.
See, I disagree. I think that she doesn't have enough. Well, that's the problem, right? So even if you think she might have enough credentials to be vice president, does she have enough credentials to potentially be president?
Yes, and that's the nub of it. I mean, this is not a normal
She's
nomination
78.
where we pick two candidates. The principal, the one running for
Mm-hmm.
president, and the V POTUS, who's like, just a supporting character. I mean, in this instance, there is a high probability that, and I'm not wishing anything bad on the Bidens or Joe Biden, but he's
Yep.
78 years old. You have to think very hard about whether or not his running mate is capable of stepping right in and taking over. And I agree with you. I mean, Kamala Harris needs more seasoning or more experience or something.
And I think we'll find out. I'm actually interested to see Wednesday night's debate, because I want to see if Mike Pence can actually win against Kamala Harris. Because I actually doubt it. Because, like I said, Kamala Harris is a pit bull. She is. And I think that I think Biden should let her out of the cage a little bit. She uncage the pit bull. I mean,
Well,
it's not going to hurt. I don't see Kamala Harris as hurting the
yeah.
campaign. I think she would help it.
After last Tuesday, you think a pit bull is what people want?
Well, the only way you're going to beat a pit bull is with a pit bull.
No, I don't agree.
In this case,
I don't agree. I think the vice president can basically ignore her, say, if that's what you believe, you're entitled to your beliefs. It's not how we do things here, or it's not how I did things back in Indiana, or it's not how we're going to do things in the Trump administration. We are not going to overregulate. You want to sue everybody and his mother. I disagree with that. I think that we need to let the market be free. You think people of color don't have opportunities on par with whites? I agree wholeheartedly. And I think here's how we take action to assure equal opportunity for all Americans. Make sure that Black people can go to schools that will educate their children
Mm-hmm.
to their full potential. Let them go to charter schools. Let them go to parochial schools. Give them school vouchers. Let the parents work with the school administrations to pick the best school for their kids.
One of the
There's
problems
one
that's
thing the vice president would say.
there's actually a problem with some charter schools down here in Florida, right? Florida has problems with its K through 12 education. Its colleges and universities are really really good, but K through 12 is just a disaster, right? And the charter schools in New York City are actually generally outperforming public schools in New York City right now. But I think charter schools down here are probably kind of but there's a lot more private schools down here, right? And I think that we do need to make these schools available for black people. And
No,
it was interesting that Biden was against busing. Now he thought it was more of like kind of a waste of money and didn't really want to mix cultures, right? And that's understandable, from his point of view. But one of my I guilty confession, I like Ben Shapiro, right? But I completely disagree with Ben Shapiro on busing, right? He thinks it's a waste of taxpayer money. I think that we need to continue busing, and we should allow busing if people want to choose to go to a different school, like a charter school. We need to allow for busing and public transportation using school buses to get kids to those schools. That's because I think we
well,
need to integrate charters in private schools.
when I brought up the issue, uh, when I was discussing Kamala Harris earlier,
Mm-hmm.
you might have missed that I said forced busing.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And I think Ben Shapiro, like me, makes the distinction between busing that uh, gets a kid to a school that his parents chose for him,
Mm-hmm.
and forced busing where he or she is being moved to a school because that school needs more white children or more black children.
Mm. Yeah.
You know,
Well, I don't think he would.
one
I
is
don't
to
know.
make
I'd have
sure
to
the
ask.
kid goes to the best school possible for that kid. The other is just, you're white, we need more white kids over here on the side of town. You're
Yeah,
black,
and you don't
we
just
want
put
to
kids
integrate
in school just
this
because they're a
white
different
school over
race.
here. Huh?
Yeah,
What's that?
exactly. You don't just put a kid in school just because they're a different race, right? I really would like to see school choice, and I think that one of the things that Trump has been pushing for a while now, and he really wants to push it in a potential second term, is school choice, right? And I am a school choice fan. Um, and I don't know how you can make the case against school choice. I've been trying to figure out how to make a case against it, but it just seems like everybody's making the case for me. Like AOC came out and said something, I forget exactly what she said, but she basically made the argument that school choicers make, and then said that we need to eliminate charter schools and private schools. And I'm like, what? Like, the conclusion didn't follow.
Well, I can talk from experience. It's an old experience. It goes back to the 90s.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and I'm going to say two things, one about charter schools and one about magnet schools.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll bring in school choice to it. So back in the 90s, the Albany City School System, which is where we lived at the time,
Mm-hmm.
basically where I raised two of my kids, they both graduated from Albany Albany High School, part of the Albany City School District. The Albany City School District had very low esteem among people of color. They thought that the public schools, which served their neighborhoods, were poorly staffed, overcrowded, and that the architecture in the schools was just, you know, the buildings were poorly maintained, and they were poor architectural designs. I mean, one of them was built in the 70s when they had this idea of open classrooms, and there were no interior walls in the school. So if you were sitting in one room, you had dividers around the
I
classroom
have been in
space.
so many schools like that. I
Huh?
know exactly what you're talking about.
So it was, it's like you really had to work to hear what was going on in your room as opposed to what was going on in the rooms all around you.
Yep.
So when the proposal came up, and it was a referendum, when the proposal came up for charter schools, it got 85% approval in African American neighborhoods. At that time, there was not a large Hispanic population in Albany. So they were all in favor of it. Now, simultaneously, the same year they had that referendum, one of my close friends ran for president of the school board, and her husband and I basically did the campaign for her and got her elected president of the Albany school board. So I learned a lot about the budgeting process. And back then, and could be the same now, but back then it certainly was, the charter school budgets were very opaque. The school board didn't know how many kids were in school on any given day. They didn't know whether the teachers were there. They just got these bills. Supposedly we have 106 kids enrolled in fourth grade. We're paying 4 fourth grade teachers send us X amount of dollars. So the school district was on the hook for the tab, but it didn't have any accountability or any good auditing process in place to assure that educational services are being delivered. Right, and that's still my big beef up here with charter schools. Now, our alternative was to start magnet schools. I was on the parent board to start a magnet school. We started a school devoted to science and technology to attract white children into a school that was predominantly African American enrollment.
Okay.
And we spent a lot of time because uh, there was me, there was another white guy, there were two white mothers, and then there were 4 or 5 black parents. So they were all insistent that we retain the African American flavor. That was the way they put it, or the African American character of the school. So we're going to have this contingent of white kids. We're going to have this super enriched science and math curriculum, but we're going to keep it like a black school. And Phil, if there's other people I know who went to the school, if they were here, they could attest to it, that we were successful at that. So a big part of education is providing high quality academic content, but at the same time retaining the African American or Hispanic or whatever culture within the school, so the kids feel safe and they feel like they belong there. So they're challenged academically, but at the same time they feel that they're not threatened. They don't have to act white to be smart.
Okay. Interesting. And that's actually one of the accusations that's happening right now. And I think there's a lot of resentment um, in the black community about the way they've been treated, and legitimately so. Right? I read a book by an author named Amity Schley. She's very conservative, but she, did a lot of research on the war on poverty and the Great Society under Lyndon B. Johnson. Right? And one of the things she talked about was when they started trying to give all this money to black communities, she said, I forget who said it. She quoted one of the government officials that was overseeing the program, and he said there basically wasn't a black person involved at all in making any of these public policy decisions affecting the black community, right? And I think that's happened a lot over the years, and I think what we're starting to see is the black community getting involved forcibly because they haven't been let. I don't think they've been let in enough on making these important policy decisions. And I think
Well,
and I think there's kind of a reckoning happening.
And that would be if I were an advocate for the Black community, or if I were Black, I might make that argument that, when we look at the Trump administration, we see a bunch of older white guys in suits.
Yes.
We don't see African Americans. I mean, we know there's qualified African Americans. I mean, there's tons of African American school principals, school superintendents, uh, deans of colleges of education all across the United States. So there's plenty of qualified people to serve in those positions, but we don't see them when we look at Washington. So the important thing to say that Vice President Pence would have to say to Senator Harris when she makes the point that I just made is, we believe in local control of schools.
Yes,
We
and that's
want
what
to
the
bring it
economic
down
opportunity
to the
zones are.
community level, where the parents and the school administrators and the teachers can work together to decide what's best for the children and the families in the
Mm-hmm.
community. And in that case, I think there is a very strong case for Trump, that the Republican Party, which I don't necessarily adhere to so much, but the Trump administration certainly is putting the federal legislation and the federal programs in place, the block grants and other sorts of things from the Department of Education, to move control of schools more and more towards community control.
And not even just schools, but local development, right? Development
Right.
of black communities, right? And he's talking $500 billion to these black communities all over the United States, because it's really important, and I think it's really kind of a good idea. I never would have thought of it,
Well,
but
it's
I'm
it's 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 a good idea. I mean, urban policy has to include uh, people of color, because a lot of them, I mean, our cities in most cases are half, 40%, some cases majority Black entity.
mhm.
They have to be involved. I mean, uh, there's no way you can make urban policy without engaging uh, people of color, from the community level right up to the level of governors and level of cabinet secretaries, even hopefully at some point at the presidential level. Again,
Yeah, one thing I'd like to see, and this is a big thing for me. I would like to see a grant program specifically to help pay for closing costs, down payments of mortgages for black families, as well as startup money, startup grants for black owned businesses, right? Because I think the only way in which people want to talk about big corporations and everything, well, the way to combat big corporations is more competition, right? And the way to bring income levels in the black community up is for them to have their own business and to create their own wealth. And that's really one of the things I want to see, is black people being able to create their own wealth, so that way we can start closing this income disparity that we have between
so
black people and
we're
white people.
talking then about using federal funds as seed money for starting Black businesses that would then grow and create capital to continue the growth of more Black businesses, expanding those Black businesses,
Hmm.
employing Black people, and giving them more economic power in the system.
Yeah, I had a lot of conservatives complain when Google started putting black businesses first on their search engine, because they're like, that's discrimination. I'm like, I'm for it, because and I think it's their right, but I think it's a great idea because it will expand wealth for black-owned businesses, and if we really want to fix the problem, we need for black people to have more wealth, and we need for them to be able to build it, and we need to provide them with the opportunity to do so.
Well, Michael, that's smart on so many levels. I mean, it is a good aspect of a reparations policy, which, we owe Black people something for all the uncompensated work that they did to build our country. So, I do favor Black reparations, and that's a good way to that's a good mechanism for giving those reparations. Second, uh, black black household income is considerably lower
Mm-hmm.
than white household income in the United States, and it's
A lot lower.
considerably lower than the USA average.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a way of bringing that income back up by their work and by the resources of their community, and that, of course, helps all the rest of us because black people have more money to spend. It grows the economy, and
Yeah, that means
they're
they get more customers.
and uh, it fits in with Trump's plan because we talk a lot about American economic nationalism. And who's more American than African Americans?
That is so true.
If their economy is growing and if they're contributing more to the general American prosperity, I mean that's a great American nationalist economic policy that helps all Americans. Makes our country that much more inclusive.
Yeah, it's really helpful. Now, when it comes to nationalism, right, economic nationalism, I think that people think that Trump is going the way of um, almost like
But
whenever
look,
we talk about nationalism, people always think about the Nazis and everything, but that's not the kind of nationalism that Trump is talking about. He's trying to bring manufacturing back. Now, Trump loves money, okay? The dude
yeah,
loves
he
money.
does. He
So,
does, and he
but he
favors the rich. I
knows
mean, let's get that right
exactly.
up front.
But he also realizes that he's going to make less money if the economy is not booming.
Right,
So
he's a
I think one of
retail
the things,
genius. I mean,
yeah, one of the
yeah,
reasons that he wanted to run for president was to increase his personal wealth by increasing the personal wealth of the United States. And I think, and I'm going to say it, the reason that Trump got elected in 2016, it's a referendum on both parties. It was a referendum on the Republicans because people are sick of the warmongers, right? We're sick of being held captive to gigantic debts from war. And people are also sick of Democrats thinking they can just redistribute all the wealth and that'll solve everything and welfare will just solve all the problems and big government will just solve everything, right? It was a referendum on both sides. So until both sides get serious and offer up a viable candidate, we're we're unfortunately left with a jerk.
yeah, yeah. I mean, Trump is a jerk. I mean, nobody can deny that. But he's a jerk who is willing to take on the bastards who are running the country.
Yeah,
Trump.
yeah,
Trump is
exactly.
an outsider. He's a Queens guy. So he's tough and crude and brags a lot.
Yeah,
Uh, but
a little too much for my
he's
taste, but
willing to take on the generals. He's willing to take on the banks. He's willing to take on
big
academic
pharmacy.
Brahmins. I mean, he's just a scrapper, and
Yeah,
it's ugly,
and
and it's
yeah,
ugly as sin. But it's something that's needed in our country right now.
yeah, and there were some people. You know who I really liked in the primary, the Democrat primary. I liked Tulsi Gabbard and Andrew Yang because I
Yeah,
felt
you
like those
mentioned that.
two. I, I I feel like those two actually had solutions. Like Andrew Yang had solutions. He seems like an extremely intelligent guy, and he did very well on Joe Rogan's podcast. And Joe
I
Rogan
ended up
doesn't take it easy on conservatives or liberals.
I
He
ended up
he goes after
voting for
everybody.
Andrew Yang. I mean, I voted in New York, so the thing was all sealed up. So, but I started thinking about my vote is just a vote as a preference. Bernie had already dropped out by then, and I voted for Yang as a vote for universal basic income. And again, this is something which, if we're talking about racial equality, is vitally important. I mean, if all of us have a universal basic income and we know that between ourselves, our spouses, a couple of kids, and maybe, a mother or mother-in-law living with us, or, us and two or three roommates, that we've got, 4,800 dollars flowing into the household every month, we can start to think about our work as something that builds up the community. And, Andrew Yang kept saying that there's a lot of unpaid work or low paid work that's very important.
And
and
I
we
think
could do a lot of that with the UBI plan.
now I am not a fan of Bill Clinton in any way, shape, or form, but Bill Clinton gave a speech a few years ago. I don't remember exactly what year, but there was a lawyer from the church that I used to go to where he actually listened to a speech that he gave on AI and how automation is in the
Artificial
next
intelligence,
10 yes, is in the next
AI,
10 to 20
artificial
years is going
intelligence.
to kill a lot of jobs. And he said that's the elephant in the room that neither side is talking about. And which jobs are going to go first? The low-paying jobs. And the people who holds the low-paying jobs in this country?
Well,
Generally minorities.
this is the thing about bringing back manufacturing. We need to manufacture in the United States, but it's going to be by AI and by automation because wage costs
Mm-hmm.
lie. You know, if you're gonna hire 500 guys or pay for 50 robots, let's buy the 50 robots because
Yeah.
you know. Uh, so even as we bring back manufacturing, we're not going to recapture a lot of these jobs. So, and I just told my wife that I don't like saying this in public, but I think we need a value-added tax. I think we need the taxation in the production stages and the taxes levied on corporations and banks, not on personal income. And I think we need a universal basic income. I mean, I think that if you have the cash, it solves so many problems. If we didn't tax the first $40,000 or so of personal income, a lot of people would make decisions and do a lot of things for themselves that we have to turn to banks or companies, corporations, or the government for now.
Well, when the Republicans redid the tax code a few years ago, it was actually very interesting. I started bringing more money home in my paycheck after that. Because they redid the tax brackets so that when you're below 40,000, you pay virtually nothing in income taxes. But as soon
Really?
as you get over that $40,000 hump, your taxes increase, you know, quite a bit more, right? But it was actually very helpful because I got married soon after that law was passed. Like I think
Mhm.
less than a year from when that law was passed, and my wife lost a job at the DA's office, unfortunately. Inner working politics and things like that.
Mhm.
She didn't want to play the political games, but they decided they wanted to play the political games, and so that's how it went. But then she got a job working for a school. But our taxes were actually relatively low, and we made pretty decent money. I think we brought in somewhere around between 55 and 60,000 our first year of marriage. So it was, yeah, it was something.
So you're saying that essentially the first $40,000 of personal income are exempt under the current plan?
No, not exempt, but the tax rate's a lot lower. And I
Okay.
think it's between, I forget what the rate is. I don't have it in front of me, but
But it is considerably lower.
yes, it is considerably lower one. I forget. I think it's either just over 40,000 or just under. I don't remember, but I was glad that I made less money that year.
So you know, this is a little bit rhetorical, but how do we look at uh, a tax plan that, from what you say, is so favorable to the lower income workers and the lower incomes brackets of the economy? How is it that we say that it's such a so favorable for the rich and miss its favorable aspects for the lower income people?
Well, okay, so one of my one of the big problems that I see um, with and this is the reason that I have trouble voting for somebody like Bernie, who always their whole goal is just they think that they're gonna get these like endless funds just by taxing the rich, right? Just tax
Mhm.
the rich, tax the rich,
Mhm.
tax the rich. But the problem is when you just keep taxing the rich and taxing the rich have this weird luxury of having the resources to either move their businesses out of the country or to a different
Or
state.
or move their assets out of the country
Yeah,
and
yeah,
stay here and
exactly.
enjoy the country and have their assets in the Cayman Islands or somewhere.
Are you familiar with Eduardo Severin,
No,
co-founder of Facebook? Okay, so he was the
no.
co-founder of Facebook with Mark Zuckerberg, and Eduardo Severin had somewhere close to, I think it was $700 million or something, and he ended up renouncing his U.S. citizenship and taking all his money to Singapore. This was under Obama.
Do they have a tax code that favors him?
They must, because if they didn't, he probably
Why would
wouldn't
he
have
go
left
there,
like that.
right?
Yeah, exactly. Why would he go there? Because he probably got a good tax break. He claims it was because he was vested in more businesses in Singapore than in the U.S. But the question is, why was he more vested in Singapore than here? Why is he more invested in Singapore? Why isn't he starting the businesses here? It's like, well, that's an up and coming market. Well, sure, but there's plenty of room in our market for improvement. So the
And how
reason
big
is
is
because there's no
Singapore? Four
incentive
and a
to do
half,
them.
5 million people?
Something like that, yeah.
It's like
And so,
what, like Connecticut?
yeah, something like that. Yeah, but that's just the thing, right? We need to incentivize people to start businesses and have more competition. And another thing that I keep hearing from Democrat talking heads, liberal talking heads, is how much richer the rich have become during this pandemic because we've locked everything down. So essentially, we locked down all of the competition. So now there's less competition. So hopefully, when we can get this economy up and running again, and hopefully both sides decide to come to the table sometime in the near future to pass another stimulus, we need competition. We need businesses to open their doors again. Otherwise, we're going to see wealth inequality like we've never seen it before.
Well, the wealth inequality was something that goes far back, much farther than Trump. And I won't say that Trump has done much to ease it. And the tax code might have favored wealth concentration. But that's not going away. Growing the economy, making sure that everybody's working, making sure that everybody can take vacations, they have good health care, that they have disposable income. I mean, that to me seems, in the short term, more things to go for. I mean, the tax code. When are we going to redo that? It'll be another 30 years before we
Yeah,
redo it.
the government's always 5 to 10 years behind the market when it comes to regulations. I've found they're generally behind the eight ball. They're behind the curve. But when it
Well,
comes to
people think of
taxes,
ways to get around the regulations. I mean, they pass them, people think of ways to get around them, and then the regulations are useless because nobody does it that way anymore.
I don't even like the idea of having tax credits or tax deductions
No, I
necessarily,
agree.
except for
I
only a
agree.
couple,
Get rid of all the
right? Because
tax deductions.
people abuse them. Even middle class people abuse them, right? If you can abuse them, you're going to abuse them legally, right? You're going to. So we need to. I like the idea of a flat tax, maybe a progressive tax, or a flat tax, or even a sales tax of some sort. Like something or other, because the
Michael,
system now is not working.
we're starting to run out of time, and this is a good subject for us to pick up when we meet again.
Yeah, I agree. I think, and the next episode is going to be about economics, so
All
it's
right.
going to be quite the thing, and I'm going to have a lot more statistics next time. So,
Well, hopefully people listening to this will enjoy it as much as I have.
yes, it has been quite enjoyable.
It's nice to catch up with you again. Say hi to Allison for me.
All right, I will.
And
Say hi, Barb.
yeah, don't don't make her spend too much time on this because she's got to be a busy person now with all her law school
Oh, I
classes.
guarantee you she's not going to listen to it. She doesn't even like listening to the podcasts I listen to generally.
All right, all right. On that happy note, Michael, we'll catch you. We'll catch you soon.
All right. Have a good one, Robert.
Be well, my friend.